You see the squirrel? Getting some of this top-notch advice. Vocal chops had a huge surge in popularity during the 2010s. It was artists like Kygo, Odessa, DJ Snake that really popularized this movement and created a sound for the decade. In order to freshen up vocal chops, it's important to use a different approach and kind of modernize the sound. One way to produce vocal chops is to take the samples from your libraries, from sample packs, and then throw them into the drop, kind of chop them up however you want. My preferred method is to have vocals that are sang in the chorus and the pre-chorus, and then these are taken to the drop and edited so they have a continuous feel with the rest of the song. In order to show you how I approach vocal choppings, I'm going to show you what I did in my latest release, Hypocrite. Here is one of the early versions of the song. It looks like it's the 14th version that I did in the production phase. So all I did for this one is pull the verse vocals in. I'd already processed the verse vocals a little bit, so I had tuned them with some auto-tune and done a little bit of compression, and I threw them into the drop here, and so then I could adjust them and it would have some similarity to the verse. It would be kind of a little bit of a connection throughout the song, but I wanted to make it a little bit more of a chorus type of thing, so it would be a little bit more rhythmic, a little bit brighter, maybe a little different. So after throwing the verse vocals in, I started to chop them up a little bit into segments and adjust them. And all I did here is every bar or so, I cut the verse vocals here, as you can see. And I did that throughout. And at this point, I'd only gotten partway through the drop. That's a little off. And then, so you'll see it starts like that, and this adjusted version starts similar. The other thing I did here was I did some tuning of the vocals to make it a little different, a little catchier. So I pitched this little beginning bit down by by 3 semitones. And in doing this, if you give yourself equal segments, like say a bar throughout the entire chorus where you cut up, then you can get rhythmic within each of the segments, but you'll be sure to complete the whole phrase by the end of the 8-bar loop, say. So this is a technique you can do if you want to have a little bit different rhythms and pitches and stuff within the vocals, but you want it to complete the whole phrase and be a little bit similar to the verse or the pre-chorus, wherever you're drawing the vocals. Now we're going to go to 3 saves later, to the 17th save of this project. And here's what the vocals sound like. So I had made some adjustments by this point. Some of it was just trial and error, so that first pass through that I had done with the vocals, I just kind of wanted to get a basic idea, and then I came back to the project a little while later and was like, I had some melodies in my head that could work, so I did some pitching and some adjustments of the rhythm. And the other important thing that I did here, and this is, I think, is important for modern vocal chops to have a slightly different take than vocals from maybe 5 or 10 years ago, is to smooth them out a bit. So I adjusted the envelopes. I did some gain automation on some of the attack and some of the release of these vocals. I faded them together a little bit. And they still have a little bit of punch to them, but most of the harsh attack is left to the drums. And then the other thing I did was I just wanted to make the vocal chops coincide mostly with the bass. One theory of music is that your brain can really only follow about 3 different elements at any given time. So this part would be the drums, the bass, and then the lead. but you still want those things to kind of tie together, especially in like a chorus that might be a little bit drier, coming from a buildup that has a little bit more wetness, a little bit more reverb, and then you'll have a better contrast if you kind of tie the drop elements together. So I did a little bit to make the melody and the bass a little bit more synergized together. So yeah, it's just a little bit of trial and error, fixing the timing, fixing some of the pitches if they don't quite work, and you'll kind of go through and massage the melodies until you get it right where you want. Now we're going to go to a couple saves later, the 19th one, and this one here I had really honed in the melody by this point. You'll notice the other thing I did was I pitched the entire phrase up by an octave. So this is where I was getting a little bit more creative, and I also layered in that same lower octave, so I have both of them together. And so you can kind of start working on layering once you've gotten your melody down, and you can like do different octaves, different formants on different tracks, and then just kind of do some volume adjustments to taste to make sure that the sound is rich and full, but the different octaves, the different layers don't compete with each other. Now finally we're going to go to the latest version of the song, which is after I did the mixing and the mastering of the song. So I'm going to show you some of the processing I did. I did go probably a little overboard on the processing of this song. So once again, I cleaned up the track a little bit here. I have these two tracks. One is the upper octave and one is the lower. Now on this group, so with these two tracks going together in parallel, I have a distortion to start off the chain. And I just mixed this in a little bit, and I boosted some of the low region so that it gives it a nice warm sound. Then I did an OTT multiband compressor. And this really will brighten up the sound a lot. So for the chorus, I wanted some pretty intense multiband compression on this to really push it forward. Then I did a couple different EQs, and I went a little crazy on this one, just trying to perfect the sound, cut out any frequencies that I didn't like. And then once again, I did another one where I took out some of the harsh range, and I boosted some of the lows. Then I did another multiband compression. This one I really like because it's called the Manny Mariquin Triple D, I believe. And this one you can really just cut out any boxiness easily. You can also cut out any harshness. So it really smooths out the sound a lot. Then I added a Valhalla vintage reverb. So I have a really short decay on this, a small pre-delay, so the reverb kind of just merges with the original part of the sound, the dry source of the sound. I mixed it in a decent amount at 23% because of this, and because it's such a small amount. But what this does is it widens out the sound a little bit, lets it take up some of the stereo space. I did make the size pretty small though, and I kept the highs while removing some of the lows. Then I did a neutrino, which is kind of nice as a little compression and a little bit of brightening of the sound. But it's pretty minor. Then I did one more reverb, so this isn't always the best technique to have multiple different reverbs, but in this case, the first reverb is kind of more of like a transient designer than a reverb, and how I programmed it and how I set it up. This one it's a nice long reverb concert hall, so this kind of makes the chorus a little bit more epic. And one thing I did with this is I grouped the reverb with a tool to turn down the width a little bit, so it has some of that length and size without filling out the stereo space too much, and that allows the bass to be wider and be heard better on the sides of the mix. Then I added a Nicky Romero kickstart, which I like to just kind of give some pumping. You could use whatever sort of pumping plugin that you want. So for a house song like this, I might normally use a quarter note one, but I decided to do an eighth note pump action to kind of give a really upbeat groove to this chorus part, but keep it a little subliminal, only mix it in a little bit. And then did a little bit more multi-band compression, get rid of a little bit more of the harshness, and then a little bit more distortion at the end, just to warm up the sound a little bit. And then I finally, while I was kind of towards the end of the mixing process, I realized I needed to add a little bit more to the very high end, get rid of a little bit more of the harshness, and so that's when I did that. So yeah, it's a little messy of a chain here, but that's what happens in the mixing process sometimes when you're not careful. Let's see how it all sounds together. Just a little brighter, a little more epic with the reverb, a little more in your face though with the compression that's going on. And I didn't, besides doing the multi-band compression, you'll notice I don't have another compressor on, a normal compressor. That's because when I took this in from the beginning, it had already been compressed a little bit on the verse, as well as the auto-tune. And this is just kind of how this mixing process went, where all of these multi-band compressors kind of did all of the work that I needed for a compressor. Finally, I just want to talk about, once you have a nice vocal chop that's established in your chorus, you might want to tease this in other parts of the song. So in the build-up part, Hypocrite. You'll notice I have it just subliminally in the background, and I did add some different effects here. So I added a little bit of EQ to cut out the highs, some of the lows, and I automated the highs up a little bit more as the build-up progressed. Then I also decreased the width of the source of the dry source of this audio, because there's so many wide elements in this pre-chorus. And I did though add a delay to kind of make it a little bit wetter. And I added this is kind of a unique way of making a wide delay, is it's a single delay, so it's coming in mono, but then in the feedback effects, I added a rotary to kind of have that delay spinning around in the mix. So the dry source is completely mono, but then there's a little subliminal delay that's kind of rotating around. And then I added the upper octave towards the second half of the build-up to really energize the build-up. And then finally, in the intro of the song, I added some of the same effects in terms of the EQing. However, I didn't have the delay at this part. But I just kind of teased a little bit of the vocal chops. I didn't want to give the complete phrase away yet. I wanted to save that for the chorus. But I wanted to give just a little taste so that when it does come, it's a nice satisfactory callback to the beginning of the song. Get really creative with your vocal chops. This is an art unto itself, and use whatever methods you want, apply whatever effects you can think of. Just kind of get in like a sound designing headspace where you'll get a beat going and then you can just do whatever you want to your vocals and see what happens. It's a lot of trial and error, but if you put in enough time, you'll start getting results that work for yourself, and you can use these methods over and over and you'll have a unique sound to go along with your music.